It's just us.
You keep saying that like we're not enough. Are you disappointed?
You guys are like.
It's like Roy, they're going, who organized?
Hello, everybody. We'll go ahead and get started this evening. Welcome to the second night of the fourth American Symposium on the American Indian. I hope everyone is enjoying the symposium thus far. Tonight we have panel discussion, Killing Stereotypes, Assassin's Creed and Natives in Popular Culture. For games and comic book enthusiasts, this discussion will explore the portrayal of native characters in the world of digital arts, animation, and gaming. Boney, Cherokee, artist and language technology developer, will moderate a discussion with panelists. Sheyahshe, 3D artist and designer. Zach Barnes, NSU student. Candessa, Tehee, Cherokee, anthropologist and Cherokee language program manager. And at this point in time, I'll turn it over to Mr. Boney.
Thank you for coming out tonight. I know there's a big basketball game and possibly a tornado, so I'm glad you're here. We're going to talk about Assassin's Creed. I'm sure most of you know this game. If you've played it, you played a part of an assassin. The series is one of the most successful video game franchises out there currently. And the really interesting thing about Assassin's Creed 3 is that the main character is a Native American, which is a pretty significant idea when you think about how massive this game is. It was the fourth biggest selling video game of 2012, and by, I believe, in February they said it sold 12 million copies around the world. So it's a pretty major thing to see, like, you have Native American characters, a major blockbuster piece of media like this. And even more interesting about this game is that the Mohawk language is used a lot in it. If you've played this game, you know that you start off as a British soldier. You play through and you become, eventually you get to the part a few hours into the game where you become the assassin as a little boy and he's a Mohawk child. And what's really interesting about this is you play as it grows up and you become this killer. But the game itself, they unfortunately one of the panelists, Thomas Deere, couldn't make it. He's going to Skype in. He served as the consultant to the game producers. So the game itself, the claim is that it's one of the most authentic games made that features a Native American character in it. They worked with several members of the Mohawk Nation to get the script for the language. So a big portion of the game itself is actually in Mohawk. It's subtitled, so you can still know what they're saying, but it's still pretty significant to see this in the game. So I guess we're going to start off here with a short video clip from the game. We won't watch the whole thing, but this is just if you're interested in seeing a lot of the game, if you haven't played it, on YouTube there's a series called A Native Place Assassin's Creed 3. And it's this guy that, I think it was Travis, he records himself playing the whole game from start to finish. This clip we're going to watch is from the part when this is the part where the village, actually you first see the Mohawk village for the very first time, and you get to hear some of the language in it and see how kind of the gameplay itself. I said we didn't watch this whole video because it's pretty long, but you'll hear some of his commentary in it. But we'll get this to get the panelists started.
Meatballs?
The one day stop.
When you said there,
Yeah,
next week. Don't say easy na kahon na di yahada.
Yay! I'm a little Indian boy now. Nice!
That's something complicated. Kind of get the idea that the
So-
creators built this world
Is this?
in which they consulted with this tribe, and I guess to turn to the panelists now. The question is, what is there? Like, how do you feel about this being made as a major video game? Is it a good thing, a bad thing? Like, for this to happen? Because when this came out, there were a lot of media reports about how this game was really. There were two sides. One side is everyone's really happy that Native Americans are in this great game. The other side is like, they shouldn't have done this because they used some language and some songs they maybe should have used. But it just depends on your point of view. So, who wants to pick up this?
I think it's a very complicated kind of thing. Obviously, to kind of try to boil things down into simply negative or positive is very difficult. The representation of indigenous peoples, specifically the Mohawk, in this game it's very complex and it's very multi-layered. One of the things that first struck me when I was playing the game is that one of the songs that you hear in the background is one that we as Cherokees sing as a social song, which points to the complex interrelationships in Indian country. But actually, sorry, I played this game with my 5-year-old, or he's almost 5, with my 4-year-old, and it was interesting to see his reaction. Because, whenever he was playing as the Indian boy, he was saying, "That's me, see, it looks like me." And, he obviously is also a mixed blood child. So for him to see a representation that looks so much like him, when that's an element that's missing from every other game, basically, that he and I play together, was, it was very interesting, and I was glad for him to have that experience in playing the game. With that being said, of course, there are some troubling elements to the portrayal of indigenous peoples within the game. It is interesting that you start out as a non-Indian man, and which I guess giving away the plot of the game is not a problem here. But sleeping with the Indian woman, and then playing as the son that was born of that union. In thinking about the game itself as an Indian woman, it was very interesting to me that there was only really one representation of an indigenous woman in the game, and I know that is something that is a issue that's pointed out for gaming in general, sort of the lack of positive female protagonists. But so I think that's a very difficult question to answer, and I'd love to hear what the other panelists' takes are on it.
That's very poignant. I appreciate it. You have a 5-year-old and I have a 6-year-old that, unfortunately, if I let him watch and play the game with me, would begin doing every single thing in Assassin's Creed, because he pretty much does it already. He uses the couch as a bounding board to train himself for whatever reason, for whatever bad guys out there. So I have not shared that with him. But let's think, and I'm glad that was a positive thing. And I would like to share that with my son. He was also mixed, and so it would be interesting. On the flip side, let's take a look at something that he has played as a video game. To contrast, if you guys are familiar with the PS2 game Brave, it's about a proto-native or a native child who's becoming a quote-unquote brave in his little society. It's cartoony, it's not real, it's not meant to be taken as real, and yet it has the word brave, it has connotations, it has totemism, So it has a lot of the things that we fight against as far as being the obligatory stereotype. And yet, he, my son, feels proud to play it because there's a little tiny bit of it that's true. There's a little nugget of it that he can take away and go, hey, I'm Native, I'm Caddo, this person isn't Caddo, isn't anything, but there's a couple of things that I can recognize as a Native person. And whether we're playing this game or Brave or Dark Watch, we all, as far as Native peoples and Native gamers, at least in my perspective, always want to see a Native character. Now, they may not always be good. We may go, why did we do that? But we want to see it. We want to celebrate ourselves. And I think that's one good thing from this game is that we're able to celebrate and recognize elements from the Mohawk culture. And I think it's interesting that you brought up the commonality of the song. I think that was very, I didn't know that obviously, but now I do because of the game. So I think it's interesting that we can see things from a common perspective from this, whether there are good or bad points, pros or cons.
Which, before I turn the mic over to Zach, I should probably clarify, I don't let him play the whole game and assassinate and kill people. The particular
You're not home right now, though.
The particular sequence, since I am being filmed, but the particular sequence that I'm referring to is when you first kind of become Indian in the game. And, Roy and I had a lot of jokes about that. It's like, hey, are you Indian yet? That kind of thing. But,
Wait for it.
but it was, once I got to the point where where I became Indian, essentially, he's a child and he's running around and he's playing hide and seek. So the fact that there was this very realistic gameplay, and it's something that, a lot of the kids engage in. My son goes to the Cherokee Nation Immersion Charter School, and so for him to be playing hide and seek, looking for these kids, kind of, finding clues and stuff like that was, it was a lot of fun to watch him have that experience within the game. Because, we don't have a PS2, we have an Xbox and we have a Wii, and most of what he plays is Mario, So for him to see that character that looks like him, that's, somewhere around his age, to be playing hide and seek, and then for those kids to be speaking Mohawk, when every day at school he uses Cherokee all day long, and the only place he hears that is at school. And he said, these kids are speaking a language I don't understand. He said, but they know English too, just like me. So, maybe when he gets a little bit older, I'll introduce him to the rest of the game. But for those purposes, it was something that he got really excited about. And as a parent, it was exciting for me to see him experience that, because there are so few places for, I think, our Indian youth to have a place where they see themselves. So even for this limited moment in this really violent video game, for him to have had that experience was, I felt like it was very positive.
If you haven't played the other game in the series, they take place spanning through history, and the first one covers the Crusades, versus it involves the Templar, and the second one involves the Italian Renaissance, and the main antagonist of that one is Rodrigo Borgia, if you know who that is. And when you get to the game that's placed in the American Revolution, it would be incomplete if you didn't include some kind of Native American tribe, because the revolution had just involved colonists versus the British. And what I really like about it is that there was actually time and care that was put into the game. It didn't just say, let's put a Native American in this game and just say we put one in there. They took the time to get it right. But the one thing I do have problems with is the main character, is that they kind of made him have a lack of personality. Like when he talks, he kind of has like an empty passion in him. They kind of, in my mind, gets conveyed through some of the dialogue like Anakin said through the Star Wars prequels. He has all this anger, but yeah, he just has this monotone voice. And yeah, to me, yeah, that's the one main problem I had with the game, but I'm really think they got it right as far as they could, you know, changing the history of it for a game. So.
And I'll add to that, you know, it's interesting to see it. Every game that comes out touts itself as, especially ones that have native characters in the last 10 years or so, as one that has taken the time to have native input and or some small level of creation. And this is the game that's really going to be authentic. And it's not surprising that this game does it. A few years back, you may remember Age of Empires had an expansion pack, War Chiefs, where you could play one or two, I think 3 different tribes as tribal entities. And it was always interesting to see it. There was specific elements from each culture. One was Mayan, one was a Plains Indian, I think maybe Lakota, I'm not real sure. It's been quite a number of years since I even remember that game. But the interesting thing for me is the immersiveness of this particular game. Being able to see in sort of almost first person or third person view the culture. You know, the first opening scene was one where a native plays Assassin's Creed 3 comments that are those wigwams. Well, it's interesting if you're familiar with any sort of pop culture, movies or video games, we're used to seeing teepees or some sort of plains culture. So here we have, you know, the Mohawk traditional houses. On Canada, we have real houses because there's a lot of wind and stuff, you know, around Denver, Oklahoma. So we have real houses. So it's that sort of influence of culture. And War Chiefs, the Age of Empires, so it's hard to see it. But it's interesting to see the immersiveness of this. So.
Yeah, going back to the comment about the portrayal of women in the game, you know, video games have a very bad representation of women in general. Yeah, one of the very first games that had a Native American in it was called Custer's Revenge. It was on the Atari 2600, about 1982, I believe. I don't know if anyone's seen this game, but if you Google it, you'll see what it is. But basically, it's you play the part of Custer, and your goal is to rape an Indian woman at the end. And this game was actually made and produced and put out. And it makes you wonder, like, what were people thinking when they did this? You know, it was actually was sold in stores. And it was a minor success. It didn't generate controversy, but that shows that this medium, you know, still needs to go a long ways to portray women. And like Candessa said, in this game, there's only one major Native American woman in it, and her whole reason for existing is to sleep with the white man. You know, this is like a big stereotype. So that leads into the next question. Do you feel this game was like, did it portray anything as stereotypical in it? Yeah, besides the woman, but like, is there anything else there that kind of really popped out at you about?
Okay.
We're trying to grab the microphone first here. I won. Well, first of all, I always have a beef with Native characters being portrayed in the video of history, of only being in the Old West, or in this case, only in the American Revolution, although the entire game is, so that's kind of a moot point. But I think the other thing is kind of alluding to what you talked about, is having a main protagonist character, even if it is an historical setting, not be full Native or not be full of that particular culture or tribe. Usually mixed blood, it's usually an influence of Anglo or white culture, so that's another stereotype that's been prevalent. I understand the reasoning as a storytelling device. You started out with an outsider, incursion character. You're bringing in a part of that element and then retying it back. All that aside, again, it's a stereotype. It's a lot of different pop culture references. So that's 2, I guess.
Yeah. What I immediately think of is the Vision Quest sequence, and you know, it felt a little contrived in a way to me. I felt there were other plot devices that they could have utilized to have to accomplish the same purpose. I felt like, you know, that sort of Vision Quest moment that exists in Native American characters' kind of story arcs. You know, like I said, I felt like it was contrived, and especially flying as an eagle in part of the Vision Quest sequence, where I think the specific dialogue was, I chose a form that would be familiar to you because of your culture. And, you know, I was thinking, well, that must be why I'm so good at flying the eagle, because it's, you know, familiar to my culture. You know, obviously I do a lot of spirit flights with my eagle spirit guide. And, but that was something that was one thing that kind of rang false to me in playing the game. And part of the reason, I think, is because, you know, as Michael pointed out, and as Roy alluded to as well, that there was a lot of care that was taken in building this world. You really feel like you're part of the world. You know, at one point, you know, you know, as Roy mentioned, you know, the strong indigenous woman ends up being there mainly to serve to bring forth this, you know, this individual in the story. But, you know, she ends up dying, and when she died, it was very poignant, and it was very kind of heartbreaking to like be in that scene, because you're really immersed in the world. And so to juxtapose that with this sort of very contrived moment, and also there was a woman, I think, she was kind of portrayed as sort of a shaman type medicine woman figure, and I felt like that was a really nice allusion to Native culture and the really strong role that women play, the matrilineal aspect of Iroquois society. And, you know, I think, I'm not sure if everyone knows that Cherokee is a part of the southern branch of the Iroquois language family. So to see that kind of nod, and it wasn't a medicine man, you know, it wasn't a male shaman, it was a female. So I thought that was a very nice touch. But you know, like I said, that sort of vision quest sequence, for me, was something that rang really false.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with the vision quest, but I really couldn't find anything I can really say stereotypical, like later on in the game, because it's been so long since I played the beginning. But the one thing that stands out to me is right after the vision quest, and you meet up with your assassin handler, you're in Boston, and
the assassin wrangler.
Yeah. And you're in Boston, and you see a guy on the roof with a rifle, and you've been told to watch him. So you get up there, the one guy shoots, kills some guard, and starts the Boston Massacre. And someone looks up, points at you, and you get blamed for the entire massacre because you're not white in this town. That's the one thing that really sticks out to me there, is they added for gameplay, but yeah, just why they add that element.
I think they're suggesting he's the great-great-grandfather of Tonto, since Moderator always sent Tonto into town to get supplies when he got beat up. So.
I don't know, is that colonial racial profiling? Is that what you're alluding to, Zach?
Yeah.
Colonial TSA guy.
Then you gotta go to Sam Adams for a lawyer.
No, I think it's interesting. It's always funny if you guys have ever looked at pop culture over a broad spectrum, what you were talking about is, you know, these, okay, check, Vision Quest, check, Eagle, check, TVs, check, flute music, you know. So there's always sort of like, check. Well, in this game, it's interesting that, yes, they bring in the Vision Quest, but they don't call her a shaman. They call her a village elder or a community elder. So they just barely got around that one, just by a loophole, I guess. But again, it's these interesting things that we always say, okay, here it comes, here, there's the Vision Quest. Okay. But they don't necessarily use that many bows and arrows, like you might see. I think there's some visual elements there. They use a hatchet or a tomahawk or a war club, which is culturally accurate to some extent, so especially in the northeastern section of the U.S. So there's some elements that are both good at that.
The next topic, what do you think about the, well, you know, in a lot of pop culture and like films and comics or whatever, anytime there's a Native American in it, if they're not, you know, like beat down and impressed, they're like usually this violent, savage type of person that just like kills everyone, and you know, all people are afraid of them. And essentially, in this game, you're playing an assassin. So So, you are this, very, on the outside, it's like you're this savage guy, who's killing everyone. But if you play the game, if you know the story, he's trying to basically, he's in the middle of the American Revolutionary War, trying to make sure that his village, his people are out of the fight, but he gets dragged into it. So, how do you think this idea of being a violent man but searching for peace kind of idea, like how does this play into this world?
Well, I think if they're going to do that, they shouldn't have made Connor have such a short fuse as he did, because he wants to keep his stride on the war, but the minute someone says we have a bit more pressing matters at hand, he explodes on that person, threatens with violence, and then does what he wants anyway.
Well, I think that, something that you're alluding to that definitely exists in popular culture is sort of the noble savage dichotomy. It's something that's very, very prevalent. It sort of gives only the choice of two representations for Native people. Savage warrior or noble stoic chief-like figure. And obviously, we're, or at least most of us in the room, either are Indigenous people or have experience with Indigenous people. And, the reality of the human condition is that nothing's that simple. Everyone has a more complicated story to tell than that. I may be a full-blood Cherokee who grew up in Sequoyah County, but I have a master's in education. I love to read graphic novels. I love to play video games. I listen to all different kinds of music. I don't fit in one box. I'm a very unusual person, and I'm proud of that. Every person that we look at who is a real person has those kinds of contradictions and those kinds of interesting idiosyncrasies that make them a real person. So to see a very flat representation of Indigenous people, most generally in the media and in pop culture, can be very disheartening. And I'm not trying to say that they do a wonderful and accurate portrayal of any other people, but I think there was a lot of recent controversy about a quip that was made on the show Mike and Molly. They said that, why would I want to go to Arizona? It's a furnace full of drunk Indians. Those are the type of representations that we unfortunately are faced with, and representing a very small percentage of the population. We have the burden of educating people about who we are, and it's a constant struggle. Especially when what most people know about us is casinos. To think a little bit more deeply about the game itself, you are playing an assassin, and that does somewhat feed into the larger stereotype that exists about Native men in general, and not even Native men in general, but brown men in general. That there is something to be feared. So that's a very interesting point that you raised, Roy.
Yeah, there's not much else to add about it. I think I will say I agree with you. There's always the shortcuts when you're telling a story, and too many times, whether it's a video game or comic book or it's a movie or TV show, the shortcuts are way too easy to take because of lack of time, lack of resources. Again, this game, Assassin's Creed 3, did what they feel like is a good job of bringing in native influence and bringing in people that knew the culture and good representation. I guess at some point, I'm not Chinese. If I wrote a story about the Asian culture or the Chinese culture, I probably would ask someone that's Chinese. However, I feel like an Asian story or a Japanese story or a Chinese story would be better told by someone of that culture. And so why do I bring that up? I think this is a really good take in a lot of ways. And again, it unfortunately has those shortcuts, those check marks we talked about. And it comes a little closer, every little step closer towards being something fruitful and fortuitous, but it would be nice to see an all-on Native American game made by mostly Native community of artists, of writers, of creators, of Mohawk people making their own game. So that would be interesting as well, even if it was just an expansion pack or mod or sim.
Yeah, that'd be really cool. I know there's a lot of interest, especially here in Tahlequah, for students to make their own games. And one thing that, this game for me personally, I've been a lifelong gamer. So again, playing this game it was pretty cool. It had problems, I would play and I think, that part was kind of dumb, but I kept playing it. And so, I played the whole thing and it was neat to see. For me, it was really great to see the language used. Again, I mentioned before, but hearing a native language in this context, to me, was really profound. Because typically, if a Native American language is used in any format, it's really brief. Like say in a movie, it's always a real short burst, it's subtitled, and there's not a whole lot to it. But this game, when you play it, there's a lot of sequences in which they're speaking Mohawk, and they're extended sequences too. There's one part I thought was really interesting in the game. There's a character in it that is kind of like he's not your blood brother, but he grew up with the guy, so he's like the brother of the game. When they get older, they have this fight between each other. It's, they're arguing about this whole idea that people talk about a lot, the two worlds idea of like we have our way, but then the outside ways coming in. Do we adopt this or not? And it was really interesting to watch this argument, and it played out in the Mohawk language. For me, it was really, it was very dramatic, not only in the sense that it was as this play like you're watching, it's drama, but it's actually had a lot of, emotion in what the characters are saying. So going with that idea, what do you think about this idea of living in two worlds and how this game kind of played with that idea? It was kind of talked about a little bit with the Savage thing, but what do you think about this?
I've always hated the walking two worlds thing. Like, I've always hated that. It's always driven me nuts. Because, as growing up, I mentioned the fact that, I grew up in Sequoia County. I grew up in a pretty traditional community. My grandparents' first language, Cherokee speakers. My mom speaks Cherokee. My aunts and uncles all speak Cherokee. And we grew up taking part in our, and I don't really care much for the word traditional either. But we grew up very, very strongly connected to community. That was something that was a foundation for everything we did. Every choice that we made, it felt like during each day of our lives was based in some way on community. How does this benefit our community? How do we help our community? So that was something that was very deeply instilled in me. Whenever I went to the University of Oklahoma, it was a completely different world. I found out that I had been very sheltered as I grew up. I found out that not only had most Indian people not grown up in the same way that I have, most Cherokees hadn't even grown up in the same way that I had. It was a shocking, eye-opening experience. I definitely experienced culture shock, and that was just in Norman, Oklahoma. But I always carried who I was with me wherever I went, every step of the way. I'm not the same girl that I was when I was 17, because I was 17 when I went to college. But I feel as though the essence of what I grew up with, I have carried with me throughout my life. And I don't feel like I walk in two worlds. I feel like there are a lot of times when the outside world has to adjust to me. And I do a lot of adjusting to things that are antithetical to the values that I grew up with. But in terms of kind of this notion of I'm an Indian that walks in the white world and I'm an Indian that walks in an Indian world, that is something for me that doesn't compute. Because I think that to kind of make that statement, you ignore the process of cultural diffusion that naturally happens between communities. You kind of have this idea that Cherokee community or the Indian community is culturally bounded, and there's no back and forth across that boundary. When in reality, that's not the way that things are. As I mentioned before, I'm Cherokee, but we're all sitting here talking about playing Assassin's Creed. What makes this event Cherokee? What makes this event indigenous? We do. We make it that because we're the ones who touch it. We're the ones who define our worlds. So that's how I would respond to that question.
Yeah, I think people like me probably should have been sheltered, far away from other people. So I agree with you. I don't know that I've given too much credence to thought the idea of two worlds, just simply because I have a hard enough time with one. And that's not really a joke. I mean, like you were saying, it's a hard enough time to bring with who you are, figure out who you are, and then deal with the rest of the universe. So from beyond that, I think it's interesting that they try to increase the level of conflict and drama using the idea of culture and what's the old phrase from the 70s? You're either trad or bad, radical, traditional, or bad Indian. So I don't know which one of the arguments they had at that point, but that's something that's used as a storyline of a lot of brother against brother. I don't know if it's always with native stories, at least those told by somebody else that are not native, but it's certainly one that's seen quite a bit. So.
Well, and I know I'm hogging the time here, but I really do think that this sort of notion that you're, even one of the three choices, rad, trad, or bad, even if you boil it down to that, it's a false choice. That is an absolute false choice. There is no reason that you can't take indigeneity and indigenize other aspects of life. There is no reason that Indianness, that indigeneity, that Cherokee-ness has to exist in this sealed box that can't change, that exists only in the past as some kind of authentic ideal that we cannot bring forth with us into our modern lives. And I think, this is kind of like a pet issue of mine, I guess that you could say. But, as an anthropologist, it's something that bears a lot of study within that field. But it's something that I think is instructive for everybody as we think about how we confront issues in our lives. To say that you have to be either or, that you're Indian or white or you're mixed or whatever those things are. It ignores the complexity of human existence at its core, I believe.
Whenever someone talks about the two worlds, the first thing that always pops in my head is the story one of my Cherokee teachers told me, Harry Juiceley, if you know him, is that when he'd go to school, it was English only. And at home, no one spoke English, they all spoke Cherokee. And on his way there, he'd always cross this train track about the halfway point. And he always said, this is my invisible line. Once I cross it, everything is English. Once I go back, everything's back Cherokee. But that's a lot, really how the world was like back then, according to like tolerance with other cultures. And I never had a problem with the two worlds. As like I went on, it was always bringing in other aspects into my world. So like as I learned more Cherokee and language and culture, it's not like I'm in a different world. It's like I'm modifying the world I'm already in. And it almost seems like the two worlds thing is kind of diminished over time. Like it plays a major role in the plot to the game, but anymore you really don't see it, at least in my eyes.
Okay. Michael, you mentioned briefly about it would be really great to see natives making their own games. And I mentioned before, I know here in Tahlequah, Sequoia, it was brought to my attention that they would like to have a video game development class. And that'd be really great to see, for us to make our own games and tell our own stories. And I'd like to ask the panel, do you know of any native-made games? And, well, if you do, talk about it or not, but that, and how do you think, making a native game would be like? Like, can you talk to that experience, how you think it might be if someone actually made their own?
In another life, in my professional life, in my non-personal life, in my non-video game playing life, I do a lot of creation of 3D simulation. So I always say this is a native video game. I don't tell anybody, because I sell it to my government clients, but like FAA or Department of Defense or something. But no, I think it's interesting. I know that I created a blog entry to talk about our event this evening. There was a quick video blurb similar to what you have here, where a friend of mine, Beth, used to be Beth Dillon. I think she's now changed her name to LaPenzie or something. But anyway, she's in the northern part of the U.S. and has ties to Aboriginal people and First Nations in Canada. She is part of it, belongs to a group of people called ABTEC, and I forget the acronym, but ABTEC, and they have a few native creations, including some video games and simulations. Nothing blockbuster or AAA. They're mid-level, but they're really good ideas. Sort of like traveling in time, one of them. So it's kind of an interesting idea. You put on these little glasses, these little goggles, and you get to go back in time and experience what the culture was for whatever they're exploring that way. Kind of like this, only there's a time travel element to it. While you guys are thinking, I will say that, for anyone that's interested, there's a lot, and all you have to do is Google. I make a joke of being a AAA production house, like people make Ubisoft made Assassin's Creed 3. Really, for anyone, kind of like what we talk about from an art standpoint, really just needs the want to do it. And as an artist, you know this. You don't have to have an iPad or special tools. You just have to want to do it. You keep doing it. And how do you get better? Well, you just keep doing it. And I will say, similar to that, much like an artist really only needs the world as their canvas, be it a piece of paper or sand and a stick. There are ways to create 3D games, even in a rudimentary form, or 2D games that are free, they're open source, they're out there, they're available. There's ways to execute it that you don't have to be a AAA gamer anymore. So Google things like Unity, Google things like Blender 3D, any sort of open source activity that would be interesting for people that are interested here or anywhere. So.
Well, obviously it would take a long time to make an actual native game. It could also be a really good tool too for anyone who wanted to keep records of language, culture, and anything, and pass it on if storytelling kind of died out in your community or anything like that. It'd be a good way to pass on all the knowledge through video games, because that's the big thing now. Like, I don't know anyone who doesn't play video games at all.
I'll add on to that. There's it's been a few years back, but if you want to Google it later, Res, video game back when Second Life, and there, games that allowed you to be sort of social in a sort of rudimentary 3D aspect. Res game is purportedly a native-made social 3D world, much like Second Life, where they focus on language skills. One of them being, I think, Cherokee, but they had an open call to many tribes, probably about 6 years ago, to come in and be a part of it and infuse your language. So it's that very same idea that you're talking about. So.
Yeah, and
Okay.
well, I kind of lost where I was going, but
Now I was just going to touch on the idea that there are individual tribes that are working on creating language education-based type of gaming experiences. I was recently over last summer at the Tehee conference, and that was a conference that was geared at the Tehee branch of the Siouan language family, which is represented by the Candessa, Omaha, Quapaw, Osage, and there's one other, I can't remember it right now, right offhand. But at this conference, one of the elders, and I believe it was of the Quapaw tribe, she stood up and she talked about how, all the kids were playing like Nintendo DSs. So they were partnering with this company to create Quapaw language software that was a DS game, essentially. Unfortunately, it wasn't actually live at that time, so I didn't get a chance to see it. But so this is definitely a conversation that is happening out in Indian country, specifically around language education and language enrichment activities. As most of you know, the majority of languages in the indigenous languages in the United States are either endangered or severely endangered. The majority of them are moribund, which means that young children are not learning them as a first language. Cherokee really is no exception. We have the immersion school, but kids already know English when they come to school, basically at the immersion school. And as Zach mentioned, everyone sees that video games, are ubiquitous. Everybody's playing video games, whether if it's not an app or a console game or whatever. Everybody's playing something, and so I think that tribal language programs sometimes see this as a way to grab people. You're not going to become a fluent speaker from playing a video game, but if it interests you and it gets you on the path to language learning, then it's money well spent, is the way a lot of people do look at that. So my hope would be if there was a game that was created by an indigenous group that, it definitely incorporates indigenous language. I know we all have YouTube, and I don't think that there's any guarantee, though, unfortunately, if something is made by indigenous people, that it's not going to still have that checklist. That's not going to still have, okay, we need a teepee, we need a shaman, we need a bow and arrow, we need a buffalo, and a vision quest. There's no guarantee that that's not going to happen, because as indigenous people, we still are affected by the aspects and influences of colonialism. I mean, this is something that we've been steeped in, and we respond as much to the portrayals of indigenous people in the media as non-indigenous people do as well. So the fact that I think having indigenous people put out more content is definitely a step in the right direction, but we also have to be conscious about being good stewards as well whenever we're doing that type of thing.
I'll say something real quick and then follow on to what you said. The checklist idea that we talked about earlier, I was on a panel reviewing native and non-native made documentaries, and the checklist, it would be, is there an eagle? Is there a desert scene or a sky scene? Is there flute music? Is Peter Coyote narrating? So this was the kind of, even though that a lot of these were native, maybe it fell to the same trope, again, because that's all we've seen for a number of years, so I think you're right.
Just wanted to add real quick, I remember where I was going. When you talked about the Quapaw with the DS games, I did a research project 3 years ago, and the Louisiana tribe in California, which is a severely endangered language where they have no elders that can teach. They still have the language documentation, and they actually made learning games, or at least got a grant to make them for the Nintendo DS, just so they could actually have the kids learn the language.
Yeah, this is the video or the game we were trying to find earlier called Res World. Res World was made by Thornton Media. He's actually the owner of the Cherokee. I think his family's from around here. This is a video on YouTube which pulled up because it shows some of the gameplay, and we'll take a look at it.
Keep in mind this is a few years old, so graphics aren't what they are today.
And keep a lookout for some of the checklist things that you use. I have really good this here as well.
Stereotypes has been working since 1995, creating high-tech custom language tools that help make the community provide us with languages, which are disappearing at an alarming rate. We've worked with more than 100 tribes and First Nations across the United States and Canada. A lot of customers have asked us to produce a high-quality video game that can teach indigenous languages. We've created such a game, and we call it Res World. Res World is a fully interactive 3D video game that teaches language. The pilot version is done in Cherokee, but the game is adaptable to any indigenous language. In Res World, you are a character in the game, and you interact with other virtual characters, speaking only the language of your tribe or First Nation. We wanted to create a virtual world from the standpoint of Indians, with Indian characters that we knew. So we incorporated humor. The characters sometimes tease you. The main character is caught, for instance, smokes really bad, and breaks down, he has to get people to push it. So it's something he approached us, and we were immediately very excited about it. Because I think we brought a different touch to some of the things we do. It's kind of interesting, a lot of people try to use the same things you have done, and kind of put their own way of doing it. So for instance, the way we introduce humor, and the way we introduce elements into the story, into the game, it's something that we love, and we're going to use some of the things that they did to improve our products later on. In 2007,